I'm Sanju Kumar. I'm part of the YouTube Global Brand Solutions team. And you might wonder what we do. So we help brands achieve their marketing objectives, especially around brand awareness, consideration, really much more upper funnel. And as you all are thinking about expanding into more markets, one thing that you need to think about is, how do I build my brand in those markets? Before you actually go into a market, you have to build a brand awareness before you can actually get someone to convert. So I want to talk a little bit about before I started at Google 2 years ago. Right before I started, I actually got married. So this is a picture from my wedding. The free food at Google has not been kind to me in those 2 years. But one thing I want to bring about is my wife and I are both of Indian origin. She was actually born in India, whereas I was born in the US, if you can't tell by my accent. And our experiences are very different. Our cultural sort of norms, our sort of language that we use, our points of reference are all very different. And that's something that you need to take into consideration when you're building brand awareness in different markets. Because the thing is that what's relevant to me isn't necessarily relevant to her. And if you're trying to think about sort of different brands, like when we first moved in together, when we started doing laundry, she said, "Where's the Surf?" which is actually an Indian detergent brand. And I was like, "What do you mean the Surf? I'm used to Tide." So just think of those things when you're going into different markets. And a little bit about sort of how we think about going local when it comes to the beauty of sound, sight, and motion. First, it's about finding your local customer. Then it's about sort of telling a great story. And I'm going to talk to you about each of these sort of processes. And then finally, it's about building a stronger relationship with your customer. As Jay mentioned earlier, Google is actually the second largest search engine in the world, so video is becoming much more important in the consumer decision journey. So if you talk about sort of finding your local customer, we think about it through 3 ways. First of all, language. Second, culture. And third, choice. When I talk about language, another sort of anecdotal piece I want to bring up is in India, when they talk about getting drunk, they actually say they get high. So when my wife and I were talking about what we did last night, she said, "I got high." And to my surprise, I was like, "Oh, something I discovered about my wife." But actually, it means something different. So just think about that when you're adapting your content to different markets, about those cultural nuances when it comes to language. The other aspect is about sort of culture. So what's sensitive, we've all heard of those brands that have hit cultural snafus or snags by sort of going into a market, not being culturally sensitive of the nuances, and there's a whole lot of backlash. The last thing you want to do when you're entering a new market and introducing your brand is have a headline that says about how you sort of created that snafu. So be very sensitive about that. And lastly, it's about choice. We've talked a lot, and I talk about choice because more and more consumers in the digital environment are not just thinking with their wallets, they're thinking with their hearts and minds. And the beauty of sight, sound, and motion in YouTube is that it is a perfect vehicle for your customer to start thinking about choosing you. And one way to think about that is also sort of choice in terms of mobile versus desktop. We've talked about some developing markets and how they're much more mobile first. So just think about that as you're developing not only your video content, but your mobile video content specifically. Now, when it comes to sort of telling great stories, I'm going to walk you through three examples. And the way we think about building great storytelling content is in 3 sort of big buckets. 1, entertain. 2, educate. And 3, inspire. And when I talk about this, I want you to think about, where does your brand currently play? And does it play the same way in other markets, or is it going to play differently? The most important thing is that you need to be authentic to your brand, because especially the digital audience and the digital video audience on YouTube in particular sees through fakeness. So you need to be authentic. So Turkish Airlines, what they did was actually the selfie shootout campaign. Who here recognizes the 2 faces on here? Yeah? It's Kobe Bryant, a US basketball player, and Lionel Messi, international soccer star. What they ended up doing was actually building a video campaign for Turkish Airlines where they took selfies around the world featuring all the destinations that Turkish Airlines flies through. So it's a natural sort of fit with the brand, and it also is very entertaining. If you haven't seen the spot, the thing I love about working at YouTube is you actually get to see these videos and talk about these videos and tell people about videos that they should be sharing with their friends and family. But the amazing thing about this video is that in the first week alone, it generated 77 million views. And not only does it lead to views, but it leads to business results as well. So on Google, it saw a 200% increase in search activity following the campaign, and a 16% lift in search activity on Google itself. Additionally, to brand awareness and consideration, and driving query markets, it actually won a few awards at the Cannes Festival as well. Secondly, I want to talk about sort of educating. Now, when you think about educating, I'm going to use Airbnb. Think of this as your virtual sort of frequently asked questions board. I'm going to play the video, and then I'll talk a little bit about sort of when we think about education content.
Look out at the world. Isn't it wonderful? And see all the places we call home. Hand-built hideaways, castles in the clouds, and bungalows with a beach out back. On Airbnb.com, you can book and stay in any one you like, all for a price that suits you. It's simple. Just enter where you want to go, the dates you want to be there, and choose from thousands of places. Then decide between a room or having the whole Airbnb.
So a little bit about this campaign and education type of content. What you should really think about is sort of how is it going to sort of talk about the product that I'm offering and really highlight the key features of the product. Because that's probably the biggest thing when you're building a brand, is really saying what you are and what you do. Secondly, it's about sort of having a very sort of global appeal. So if you looked at that, creative, it really focused on not only a skyscraper in New York, but also a bungalow in Bombay. So it really has a whole bunch of sort of a global appeal when it comes to sort of exporting the creative. And then finally, it really sort of drove a call to action. It really talked about finding out more, clicking on, sort of going to Airbnb and really driving more action. So those are just 3 things that you need to think about when building educational content. Now I want to show you sort of the next version of this, because it's not only about building sort of for your home country, but also exporting. That's why we're here today. So I want to show you a Chinese example of this creative as well. And I'm only going to play a few seconds, but I'm going to illustrate a point through this.
世界咁大，有數唔完嘅精彩，美好嘅家園遍佈每個角落。
So you realize it's basically the same visual creative, but what they've done is just voiceover, and it's a very sort of cost-effective way. We're all not the big brands who are here in this room, but if you're a smaller brand, this is a very cost-effective way to do this. An even more cost-effective way to do this is subtitles. And one thing to think about, it was mentioned in earlier presentations, is in certain markets you're going to have multiple languages. So for example, in China, you might have to have a Mandarin as well as a Cantonese version of the spot. So when it comes to educational content, it's not only about creating the content, but also making sure it gets discovered. So one thing when you're building your YouTube presence is to think about sort of how is my consumer going to discover my content that resonates for them. One way to do this is to build playlists. So actually what Airbnb did here was create a playlist that explains Airbnb, but had it in all different languages. So someone from Japan can find it very easily versus someone in the US. The last example is really around sort of inspiring. So I like to think of inspiring content as something that sort of tugs at the heartstrings or makes you smile or laugh. And Puma actually did this with their Hooligans campaign. So if you think about their Hooligans campaign, one of the things that, and this is very relevant to export because a person in the UK is not going to cheer on someone in Spain or Germany, right? And so in this case, their inspirational content, really focused on finding that common theme and building different iterations of it that really speaks to the local market. What this Hooligans campaign actually featured was, it really answered the question, if there's a game day that's the same day as Valentine's Day, how do you sort of fit your needs. So I'm going to play the video. It's actually quite funny. It's inspirational as well. And then I'll talk a little bit more about it.
I'll be your dream, I'll be your wish, I'll be your fantasy. I'll be your hope, I'll be your love, be everything that you need. I love you more with every breath, truly, madly, deeply do. I will be strong, I will be faithful, cause I'm counting on a new beginning, a reason for living, a deeper meaning. I wanna stand with you on a mountain. I wanna bathe with you in the sea. I wanna lay like this forever until the sky falls down on me.
So you get the point, actually. It's not only showing how you can be passionate about football or soccer, depending on where you are, but also passionate about the person that you love. So this was really an ode to their significant others, in addition to sort of satisfying their need to watch the game. And as you notice, I'll play a few seconds of a German version of this, and you'll see a few differences, but I'll speak a little bit to it afterwards.
Singet mir ein kleines Lied. Wie eine Blume am Winterbeginn und so wie ein Feuer im eisigen.
So it's a different song, it's a different language. It's the same concept, though. It's basically the love story between fans, soccer, and their significant others, and how they balance both. The other thing you'll notice is that Puma isn't necessarily sort of the product placement doesn't have to be at the core. If it's a great concept that's inspirational, let it sort of lead on its own. There are small sort of, you see the footwear, the attire, and that sort of thing, but at the end of the day, people will realize it's your brand and what your brand represents, and that goes back to the point of about authenticity. Now, when it comes to a little bit of sort of the resources, I want to talk about the three different concepts and sort of the way that we thought about it. There's one creative, one global concept, and massive scale. And that's really the sort of Turkish Airlines example. There are a few things to consider, really, when it comes to sort of the resources that you have, the time commitment that you need to build, and how much sort of media you're going to put behind it. So in terms of sort of a big concept with global reach, it's really about sort of high production costs, high lead time, high star power, and there's no need to version it because sort of people recognize Lionel Messi and Kobe Bryant. Secondly, when it comes to one creative, many versions, this is really when it comes to sort of a single creative with voiceovers or subtitles. Subtitles are a much more cost-effective way to do it. So there's minimal creative costs, quick turnaround because it's the same creative but just versioning of it. But potentially lower cultural resonance versus something like one concept, many iterations, which has very high cultural resonance. But again, the high production cost could be there and slower turnaround because you have to have multiple versions. Now, once you've told the great story, it's about building a deeper connection. And Mango, which is a European fashion designer, they actually did this by, one thing that's amazing about sort of YouTube and the digital environment is that it can be your own testing ground for what's resonating and what's not. And that can translate to your offline strategy as well. So what they ended up doing was looking at sort of which videos were resonating in specific markets and transitioning that to their offline print strategy, whether it's catalogs, direct mail, or print ads. They looked at sort of which models had the highest view rate, which outfits had the highest view rate and should be featured. So it really sort of talks about building a stronger relationship by taking the insights that you get from online and moving it into your offline strategy. Another way to build a deeper relationship is by sequential storytelling. It's basically building, helping to move the consumer down the funnel by finding out who's raising their hands. Through TrueView, you're able to see who's skipping the ad versus sort of watching the ad in full. So you can remarket to those people who are saying, I want to watch this ad. What's the next portion of the story? So Zales actually did this in terms of buying an engagement ring. they had sort of a top-line brand level spot, and then went further and further and further based off of who was watching the spot, and remarketing in the next version of the creative to help move them down the funnel. So these are, again, just a few ways that you can sort of find your local customer, tell a very compelling story through the entertainment, educate, and inspire sort of framework that I talked about, but also think about sort of not only your resources, but also what you're willing to commit. And then also just building a broader sort of relationship with your consumer through tactics like storytelling and remarketing.